Okay, let's talk about changing behaviour. In many ways, changing behaviour is the holy grail of learning and development these days. If you've been on training programmes where you've learnt some new things, you've looked at models, you've talked about theories, maybe even talked about practicalities, but then come back to work and carried on doing what you've always done, then you'll understand why I say that actually changing behaviour, although it may be the object of a training programme, isn't always the end result that we get. Because in fact, changing your own behaviour, or indeed changing someone else's, isn't that easy. It doesn't change just because you think that it might be a good idea to, especially if it's long-standing, well-ingrained habitual behaviour. So, as a basic principle, I think it's fair to say that anything you can do well, you can do without thinking about. Which means you're doing it on autopilot. So if you've been doing something a long time, then as soon as you realise it's time to do a certain thing, you just make it happen. So a good example of that, which probably most people have an experience of, is learning to drive a car. When you first learn to drive a car, it seems almost impossible. There's so many things to pay attention to. There's so much going on. But then once you master it, you find that actually you can drive a car without thinking too much about it. Your full attention, I hope, is on the other vehicles on the road and traffic signals and so on. You're not actually paying attention to what you're doing with your hands and feet in order to control the car. And it's the same way with other things that you might do. So you might have habits in the way that you participate in a meeting. You might have habits in the way that you organise what's on your desk, or perhaps the way that you plan your diary. And because you've done it that way for so long, that's the way you always do it. You don't even think about it. You just do it. So if you want to change behaviour, saying, I'm going to do that differently, usually isn't enough. We often have to take a look at the bigger picture. And this is where some of the NLP techniques can be really useful. Because the NLP notion of programming is all about habitual behaviour. So if you thought that NLP in terms of programming was about brainwashing, then listen up, because I'm about to disabuse you of that notion. So programming is actually about looking at habitual behaviours. People say human beings are creatures of habit. So if you think for a moment about something that you do every day, in fact, for example, something like the sequence of events after your alarm clock goes off in the morning is a really good example of this. Because what tends to happen is that the alarm clock goes off here, and then there's a whole series of events that will result in you being ready to go out to work. So you're standing at the door, bag in hand, and off you go. So in between these 2 points is the programme that gets you from being in bed asleep to leaving for work. And you can look at that programme and you can analyse all the steps in it, all the different things that go on, and that will give you some clues about the programme that's running your behaviour in that time. Now, why would you do that? It kind of depends on what this end result's like. If you're standing here as a result of your morning programme, ready to go to work, and you've had a good breakfast and you're suitably dressed, you're well rested and you're feeling positive and upbeat and ready to face your day, then I'd say that's a pretty good programme. But if it's not like that, if you're standing here and you haven't had a proper breakfast and you're feeling stressed and you're not looking forward to your day, then I'd say that's probably not such a good programme, and there may be things we can do to improve on it. So how would you go about changing a programme? Well, there are lots of formal techniques we can use with NLP, but the basis of it really is about understanding the different steps in that process and working out what triggers each one of them to take place. So, for example, let's go to another sort of a situation. If you notice that you react badly to certain things that happen in meetings that you attend, then rather than just saying, oh, I must stop doing that, or I must remember to do something different, if you think a bit more deeply about it and analyse, well, what is it that triggers you to behave in the way that you don't want to do? Then, rather than just focusing on the behaviour, you're focusing on a bigger section of programme. And if you can work out the cause and effect relationships between those different steps, then it may make it easy for you to change something up front that means that you never get to this piece of behaviour that you want to change or you want to stop doing. And that's a whole lot easier than trying to deal with this piece when it's actually happening. The same would apply if you wanted to influence somebody else's behaviour, especially if you want to do it in a way that they don't notice that you're influencing their behaviour. So again, if you want to get someone to do something that they don't normally do, or you want them to stop doing something that they do frequently, then have a think about what happens in the run-up to that. Is there something that you can do 5-10 minutes beforehand, half an hour beforehand, 3 days beforehand, that will influence what happens when the person gets into the situation where the behaviour in question is important? Because lots of people I talk to have goals that involve other people's behaviour. Whether that's people at work, I wish that person would deliver that information to me on a regular basis, or they would do it on time, or they would do it without being asked for it. Or it might be at home, and the one I hear most frequently is, I wish my teenagers would tidy their bedrooms. Well, that one probably isn't going to happen easily. But there are things that you can do to change what other people are doing, because while we all have programs of behaviour that we run for ourselves, that in response to some trigger we undertake a sequence of behaviours, we also have programs that run between people. So it's like a game of table tennis. So I do something, the other person responds. The nature of their response triggers me to do something else. What I do triggers them into their next step, and so it goes back and forth and back and forth. So quite often when someone's behaving in a way that you're not comfortable with, you're part of the program that's triggering that behaviour. Not always, but quite often if it's someone that you deal with regularly, if you notice, you'll find that there are things that you do that contribute to that other person's behaviour. So if you change what you're doing, it actually creates a possibility that somebody else could do something different. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's really helpful to be able to manage your own behaviour and to have some choice about it, and to have some strategies for changing things that don't work. So, here's a little task for you. Pick something that you do that you know doesn't get you the result that you want. And have a go at figuring out what triggers you to do that. And is there something that you could do before you ever get there that would mean that you would stop doing this thing that doesn't work, and you'd have the choice to do something more successful? It's worth thinking about, isn't it?